Buonasera a tutti. Bellissimo vedere tante facce amiche di nuovo qui in EIMA dopo un anno e alla vigilia di EIMA 2022. Sono Alessandro Malavolti, presidente di Federunacoma, l'Associazione Italiana Costruttori di Macchine Agricole e anche l'organizzatore di EIMA 2022. Allora,
well, at Federunacoma, we've already described agricultural machinery as a growing sector, and demand has proven us right. Demand is increasing considerably for a very simple reason. Let's look at the figures. According to FAO data and OECD data, the world population was 7.8 billion in 2021, will grow to 800 million people more by 2030. In order to feed these people, we need 17% more agricultural production concentrated on grains on the one hand and meat on the other. We need a lot more meat. Over the next few years, especially in terms of poultry and pig meat, demand is going to be increased, and of course there'll be an increase in demand for animal feeds. This is the first macro phenomenon. The only macro phenomenon we are observing, it's a change in diet. Poorer countries are consuming more protein, and richer countries are consuming more fresh products. Another important aspect, which is very important for us, is that over the last few months and years, there's an increased diversified production. Geographically speaking, almost all countries are becoming independent in terms of agricultural production. So no longer dependent on the United States, Russia, Australia, and other countries. They're all trying to produce whatever they need inside their country or their continent. There's only thing we can do about it, because available land is not a lot. But we can increase yields per hectare, which can be brought to a satisfactory level, to meet the current demands on extensive farming, and especially in specialized farming. We can see some in fruit and vegetable farming. Specialized crops have considerable added value and have another important feature. They are much more sustainable, both in terms of water consumption. Producing 1 kilo of meat or 1 kilo of vegetable protein equivalent takes much less water, much less soil when fruit and vegetables are produced. In Italy and in Europe, 13% of the used agricultural surface is taken up by specialized crops, 87% for arable land. When it comes to added value, figures change considerably. There's 13% of specialized crops produce over 48% of added value in economic terms, whereas 87% of arable land produces 52%. So there's a considerable difference between yield and added value per hectare. And in Italy, this becomes particularly interesting, because in Italy, we are world leaders in specialized agricultural machinery. Let me give an example. China, over the last few years, invested a lot in increasing the production of grapes. In the past, they practically produced no grapes, and now they are one of the leading producers in the world. According to OECD and FAO data, We need three things in agriculture. Number one, agricultural machinery, then a refinement and fine-tuning of chemical inputs, and thirdly, biotechnologies for animal husbandry and seed production. For emerging countries, these technological requirements must be based on increased production. In Europe, in the United States, and in many advanced countries, technology is especially used to increase sustainability. Europe has set a very important path, quite challenging and far-sighted, turning agriculture into something much more sustainable in a more circular economy. Let me now come to technology. Prospects for our world are quite good, and I'm talking about the agricultural machinery sector. A study carried out by Export Planning, it's a market survey company, showing that between 2023 to 26, the world trade of agricultural machinery should grow by 5.7%. Hence, we have very good prospects for our sector. This is just a prospect. Of course, there may be different unpredictable impacts, such in the case of the COVID-19 pandemic. But we've seen that even during wars, agriculture did quite well. If we look at 2020 and the agricultural machinery market, this is just about tractors. In 2020, the tractor market increased by 7.7%, United States 17.7%, India 10.9%, China almost doubled, Turkey 8.7%, Italy with slightly declined, but then caught up almost immediately, the Germans going up and France slightly lower. So this means that the agricultural machinery market is not so much affected by short-term crisis.
In 2021, we had a phenomenon which is equally important. There was a recovery which was very strong, indeed very strong, with the very large power machines. We, in fact, grew in engines and machines by 13%. With some markets that went particularly well. For example, US, we had 317,000 tractors with a growth of 10%, and also they grew the previous year. India got to 900,000 tractors, 11%. So did Turkey, and Europe 13.66%. In Italy, in terms of registration, we've had 36% more number of tractors sold. So this was an exceptional year. The only country that suffered was China, due to limitations because of the pandemic. Now, what's happened this year? This year, we started and have started fairly well. You see that there are some negative figures, but in fact, the order books of our companies are all pretty full. We've had some difficulties in the supply chain. Last year, we grew a lot, even if there were these difficulties, because we had some inventory, and our companies forged ahead because they were able to recover, and we did so in the midterm. This year, in fact, the problems came to a head. But this year, we are definitely with higher numbers compared to the pre-pandemic period. So the market is there. I'd like to give you just a couple of figures. Italy Italy, for example, is 19%, and India, for the numbers, you remember they had 900,000 tractors, and now it's minus 2.3%. Europe, which is our biggest market, goes down by 7.6%. Now, this is a snapshot, if you like, of what's happening. But in Europe, there are countries that are growing. So it's not all negative. And some countries are positive, like, for example, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Serbia, Croatia, that are growing. Now, this is an idea of the Italian market. Now, we're talking about a market which has gone down by 15.3% this year. Now, we have at October, these are October data, in other words, just come out, at 17,250 tractors, which means that it's minus 15.3%. And the year should be closed around, we hope, a little bit more than 20,000. But compared to a couple of years ago, is nonetheless very positive. And if we could have produced everything that the accounts asked us, we would have really been in the black. And also in the trailers, minus has stopped at 7,340. And, for example, the telehandlers closed in the first 10 months with a 24% decline. But last year, in fact, was really very, very good. But nonetheless, this year it's almost 1,000. Now, in fact, gardening, there was a particular fall because of the weather conditions and also because of May, June this year that saw a certain fear on the part of the user, the end user, with regard to inflation that was beginning to show its head. So people, in fact, who might have decided to change his robot mower or whatever, decided not to and was rather frightened and therefore didn't buy it. But nonetheless, we're talking about volumes which are much higher than 2019. So we're not talking about a market in crisis. We're talking about a market that's holding up. The same thing for components in Italy this year. Components have gone up. Interesting is to see within this market where the technology demand is. This is the seventh census, and in fact, many thousand companies were asked whether from 2018 to 2020 they had made technological investments, and out of these over 1 million, a large number said that yes, they had invested. Investments had been made by them. Mainly, they had invested in mechanization, generic mechanization. They didn't specify which sort of mechanization, and this was for especially for machines in planting and also in seeding. 8.8%, in fact, invested in tillers and so on. So more than 50% of the companies invested in technology in agricultural mechanization, and this makes us very proud indeed, and it shows a good trend for our sector. Now, the best, we did best in export rather than in the domestic market. Even if we find it difficult to deliver machines, nonetheless, we ended up in a positive in the black, not only because of the number of pieces, because in number of machines we have a fall, but we have increased in our revenue. There's also a component that we have sold more sophisticated, larger machines, so therefore a higher value per unit in terms of tractors. You can see the figures in the slide. We're talking about exports, by the way. and these are the ISTAT Statistics Board data, and we're talking about, for the rest of the machines, a growth of 13%, and we're slightly also up in weight-wise of machines. You shouldn't look at the type of machine because they're very, very different, but certainly we've seen an increase in the actual weights of the machines. The prospects from the end of this year, we are going to close this year at 13.7 billion compared to our very good last year, and this will be about 14 plus 60 billion this year, something that we have never seen before in this year, so a 3.7% up on last year. In fact, there is a reduction, as I say, of about 6% in the number of machines sold. But again, the mix of machines sold and the type of machines sold, more costly, more sophisticated, have equaled things up. But anyway, we're among the second and the third industry in the world for agricultural machinery, and a small country like Italy, of course, that makes us very proud indeed. Now, what's going to happen in the agricultural world this year? They're talking about a small drop in agricultural production. We, in fact, have a 1.7% of cereals, but we're talking about 2,768 million tons, nonetheless, of cereal production. The reasons are twofold. The first is due to a fall in maize production in the U.S. and at a world level, a fall in the production of rice. We, in fact, are using the inventory, and the fact that we have the prices which maintain high due to this phenomenon of us using inventory. With regard to mid-long term, I think, have good growth prospects. The only thing that might trouble us in the near future is another war or pandemic. But those will be short-term things. But in the long term, the sector is destined to growth. And this is very, very positive. Now, let's look at the downside. What's worrying us really is the cost of production, of course. Now, I'm not talking about the cost of productions of our companies, which were, in fact, hit our companies very much. And we had to offload this on the cost of machines. And, in fact, we thought that demand might fall because of this. But it's cost of production for the farmers. They have had such enormous rise in energy costs. That's the reason, especially those that produce in greenhouses. That is an enormous burden, and also farmers who have to run stables and so on. We've seen fertilizer costs go up enormously because of the lack of agricultural chemicals that came especially from Russia and Ukraine, not just those countries, but these were the major European suppliers to Europe, but also chemicals as well. There was a lack of ammonia and many other nitrogen products. For example, the price of chemical products have grown compared to June 2020 to the tune of 100 or 150%. But luckily, the price of food has gone up, and that has somewhat compensated the cost. Our greatest worry, however, is that this increase in costs will cause a lesser propension on the part of the farms and businesses to invest, because in fact investing in new machines will in fact help to cut from all points of view, fuel, chemical agents and so on. So investing in better machines is overall an economy. Now, energy costs is also attacking, of course, our companies, and here I'm talking as a businessman. Our production costs. For example, at the beginning of the year, we had the big issue of the increase in the raw materials. This happened last year, but everything has gone up: plastic, iron, ferrous materials, bronze, everything has gone up. They calmed down a bit in May and June, as in some logistic costs fell, both in import and in export. But recently, we're very worried with regard to energy costs. Of course, we are transformers, so we use energy. Confindustria says that in Italy, the energy cost out of total cost of production goes up to 9.7% from 4.6%. So that's an enormous increase in energy. And of course, that involves very much the largest part of our companies. In terms of macroeconomic situation, well, here we see a rather worrying situation, because there are a whole series of indications in the next couple of years which don't foresee a very lively macroeconomic situation, apart from what has happened with regard to the Fed and increasing their rates, and the ECB did the same thing, up the rates, and this could cause problems. The GDP growth forecast for the U.S. is 1% only of growth. The GDP in the euro goes from 3.1 to 0.5%. In Russia is less bad than had been expected. It is going down less than was thought. China, in fact, slowed enormously. You know that the Chinese figures are difficult to read, but when you go from 8.1 to 2, you realize, of course, that there's some problem there. Some countries in South America also who finance themselves on the international market. Argentina, for example, has gone from 10.4 to about 2 foreseen for next year. And in Italy, we're seeing pretty much the same thing. The war, inflation, energy costs. This year, we're going to, we have 3.2 is the estimate, and for next year, it's minus 0.2%. After many years, we're going back to negative growth in Italy for next year compared to this year. And of course, that's very worrying. The metal mechanical and agricultural mechanical sectors are, despite this, markets that should hold up. They should hold up fairly well, especially if on the part of the state and the government to continue to invest in technology. If they continue investing in this, you know that many choices on the part of Europe and U.S. Market of investment is due to state aid or to incentives. And whether it's right or wrong, but that's a fact. In fact, many things that were in fact developed in previous years, for example, the tax credits for machines 4.0, the ISI INA decree for machines with high safety requirements, the Sabatini law, and the Next Generation EU continue with that thrust and encouragement to invest, and therefore to purchase. And if this continues, well, we will hold up. And especially, therefore, we ask that a certain different direction be taken. We as Federunicoma have asked the policymakers to extend immediately by 6 months, the 4.0 questions, because we are lagging behind in production. We don't have sufficient chips to deliver the machines that we're being ordered. Many sectors are asking for this, and we see that things are proceeding. So hopefully we will be able to extend this deadline for more than 6 months, and already 50 80% last year of the financing, in fact, of the 4.0 was brought forward, and hopefully this new government will do the same. Now, what we want to do is to try and change paradigm, therefore. Contributions to agriculture also is considered as a concession or as a compensation, and I would like us to change our mindset so that these contributions be given to make investments. Otherwise, we won't be able to achieve what we want. Europe is asking us loud and clear to have a recovery and a resilience plan and have this included in the Next Generation EU, all great things, a Fit for 55 policy, which means by reducing by 55% emissions and get to neutrality in 2050. But if we don't make these sorts of investments in our sector, we won't get there. All these technologies to be able to get to those farm to fork achievements and aims and so on. They're all available in terms of the possibility of getting there, but we have to invest in the right machines, and therefore for this we have to have incentives and a contribution on the part of the government. With regard to technological innovation, we have another aspect. As well as reducing the inputs and acting less on the environment, we can, in fact, with agriculture, produce energy. And we have great examples in the circular economy. We, from waste, produce biogas. We produce energy. And we can also help everybody to manage this transition and abandoning fossil fuels, especially fossil fuels coming from Russia. We're continuing to do this in Italy. Contributions hopefully will continue because we need this. We mustn't, in fact, waste what we have as residue. We have to make our agriculture much more sustainable, and therefore our whole economy much more sustainable. Finally, let's come to our flower in the buttonhole, our trade show. This is taking place in a very historic moment. It's a moment whereby we go from very important growth to a technological phase of development. You see great things at the fair, but I'm not going to explain this. Mrs. Rapastella will be talking about this. But I'd like to end with one last thought that I hope will help those who listen to us from Italy, from Germany, from Brussels, and in the rest of the world. The industry of agriculture, mechanized agriculture, has taken up the challenge of sailing in very troubled waters. We've gone through COVID, the scarcity of raw materials, and all the other problems. And we're trying to develop agriculture which is increasingly sustainable and which is increasingly ecological in its mindset. And we asked the policymakers to, in fact, change their mindset and give us a new thrust that we are not just asked to use less input, but encourage the farmer and the enterprise to invest more. And this is all important. We can't be alone to fight this war. Give us the constraints that you like, but if you don't give farmers a hand in their income, we will increasingly be in difficulty to be able to satisfy our forks and the table and produce the right food. EMA is, I've always said, the best university for agricultural mechanization, because in the next couple of days you'll see what's best out there in terms of mechanical developments for agriculture. But who better to explain this than Mrs. Rapastella, who's going to take the floor now.
Buonasera a tutti e benvenuti in EIMA. La conferenza
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to EIMA. The press conference of the day before the official opening of the trade fair is extremely important for us because it gives us an opportunity to give you an overview, and it's an opportunity to meet and have an exchange and present the overall scenario of agricultural machinery, recent developments, and the current demands to be presented to your attention. It is an equally important appointment for us, as it gives us a chance to have a preview of the next 5 days and also set EIMA within another global scenario, the trade fair scenario. Let me start by looking at the positioning of EIMA within the international trade fair panorama. EIMA International is recognized worldwide as an important event, a highly successful trade fair. It has a very long history, which began in 1969 and has continued for 45 editions. With a constant progress and a continuous growth in terms of exhibitors, area occupied, visitors, and media coverage. It is also the only international exhibition which kept running during the COVID-19 pandemic, when all the other international trade fair had to stop because there were no contents or no exhibitors. So this is a very important fact, which certainly confirmed the value of our brand as EIMA International. If we look at the figures over the last 10 years, we can realize the growth trend that has been experienced by our exhibition in terms of exhibitors, visitors, international standard and credibility. On the left, you can see a very evident growing curve. We hit a very high level, 317,000 visitors. Then there was a decline last year, but of course, still during the pandemic, results were quite good anyway. 270,000 visitors, almost 26,000 from abroad. As far as the increase of exhibitors are concerned, the figures are quite important. And of course, we're quite unlikely to be able to further develop in that area with the plus 30 to 40%. This is certainly something we cannot possibly achieve. But after last year's drop, you can see that the curve has gone up again. However, since the terrible experience of the pandemic, we've observed how the orientation towards general quality, much more than quantity, is one of the new strategic objectives of all trade fairs. And EIMA's numbers this year, which we'll see in a minute, confirms this new approach and underline a precise organizational choice. The data of the observatories dedicated to the exhibition sector, especially GRS, which is the research company that we partner with, and UFI, indicate that this sector is in enormous expansion in all areas of the world, with the exception of China. In fact, the country is still closed and, still keeping quite extensive confinement, even in the post-pandemic era. The trade fairs considered by the market to be landmark trade fairs have fared better in 2019 in terms of exhibitors and square meters, thus consolidating their position in the exhibition landscape. There's a minus 20 to 30% in the number of visitors almost everywhere, but with a much higher quality of visitors, which consequently increases the overall appreciation of the exhibitions. This is due to several factors. Business travelers are better selected, and the decision makers tend to go to the trade fairs. Those who want to see and be aware of the market represented as a whole, precisely in the trade fair context. They want to see with their own eyes. They want to make a direct comparison and be reassured about their own business strategies. That also applies to the exhibitors who have raised the level of the presence of their front lines at the trade fair. So the collective moment becomes much more important than it used to be. Exhibitors are also making much more targeted selection of the exhibitions on which to invest, probably reducing the overall number, leaving qualitative space for the essential trade fair events with an important and massive presence, taking up more spaces and making more investments. So we can say that a number of certainties have been consolidated that we've always upheld within our organization and federation. They are being consolidated. Trade fairs set the quality standards of an entire industrial chain. They are the collective moment par excellence where supply chains see and co-create the future. They are still today, and even more so than in the past, are indispensable tools for strategy and business. We'll never stop repeating that the peculiarity of EIMA in succeeding in sustaining performances of good quality level and increasingly high goals is that of being the voice of the industry that we proudly represent through our federation, which is Federunacoma. So it is such a positive tradition, as well as the fact that it's set within an exhibition context that makes EIMA a case study, an interesting phenomenon that can be analyzed by those involved in exhibition organization and marketing. EIMA is a professional and international exhibition, a hyper-specialized show, and this is its mission. Its mission, which inspires all the organizational and promotional initiatives that are put into play and which aim at encouraging business and bringing together supply and demand on a global scale to co-plan the future of this industry, to be an indisputable and unmissable point of reference for all players in the great world of agriculture. At the end of the last edition of EIMA, we were brave enough to ask our diversified world to judge the exhibition on strategic concepts in order to be able to better plan our future and better plan this EIMA 2022 and beyond that in order to make it stronger and better in the future. So we asked, what's your perception, what's your experience at EIMA? International, 4 out of 5. Professional, 4.7 out of 5. Necessary, 4 out of 5. Comprehensive, 4 out of 5. It's a very high score. So being scored with very high marked at school, when the homework was very, very difficult. It's been extremely insightful for us and will base future choices on the results of this survey. But for the 2022 edition, we worked on these 4 tenets in order to reassure companies and visitors on the merits of our choices by setting up a professional exhibition for decision makers responsible for strategy setting in the future, international to guide markets and business, and comprehensive through its hyper-specialization, and necessary because it must be a not-to-be-missed event in the exhibition panorama. The numbers of the 2022 edition and the International Soul. The numbers of this edition of EIMA speak of an exhibition event that has returned to the pre-pandemic levels, offering a broad range of options and many reasons to be there. There are 1,500 manufacturers, about 1/3 of them foreign, from 40 countries, visitors expected from 160 countries, official delegations, thanks to the valuable collaboration with the Italian Trade Agency and the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 80 countries. We're also talking about 120,000 square meters of exhibition space and 8,000 square meters of outdoor areas that will offer the public more contents and insights into the different showcases. So these are EIMA's credentials, which confirm its international soul. An international soul which is useful for all models of agriculture all over the world. We have a 3,000 square meter pavilion entirely devoted to B2B meetings with 450 economic operators and foreign journalists selected from 80 countries representing 5 continents. In this navel of the world, we'll have B2B meetings, of course, as usual, with interpreting services, contractual, financial, insurance, consultancy, as well as a strong hospitality structure. Lastly, 3 focus days have been scheduled. The first one today and then tomorrow and November 10th, dedicated to some markets in Latin America, Canada, Asia, and Oceania, and Europe. Let me mention the capillary activity of promotion of EIMA, which is carried out around the world with a roadshow. We organized 17 press conferences in 13 countries. We'll never stop repeating that the 14 product sectors, the almost 60,000 machine models on display, the 5 themed showcases, and from this year, the addition of a truly extensive outdoor show area, they all contribute to making EIMA a hyper-specialized exhibition embracing the entire agri-food and agromechanical chain. If we look just out of curiosity at the numbers of the 5 shows that have a very nice and strong character this year and are very customized, aimed at raising the quality level, we realized that we hit record numbers. About 700 exhibitors, 230 from abroad in EIMA components in 3 halls, covering 30,000 square meters of exhibition space. 200, we have EIMA Green, about 200 exhibitors in 2 pavilions, 33 and 34, over 10,000 square meters of exhibition, plus an external digital area. EIMA Digital, you can see 1,500 square meters of exhibition. Well, we'll see the cutting-edge digital solution, automation, electrification, all about the future of our sector. EIMA Energy, 73 exhibitors, including 7 foreign ones, for 10,000 square meters of outdoor area. Really record figures. The outdoor areas of this exhibition will include 8,000 square meters of attraction and show spaces with TOTI, the event promoted by Tractors, a magazine that awards the best tractor of the year, and we'll have a dynamic show of the finalist model in the area set up for this purpose, for a program of shows for all the days of the exhibition. For the first time, we'll have the Garden Emotion show with tests of lawn tractors and gardening vehicles that will also feature a program of daily events. So we'll have a daily schedule of events and shows. And last but not least, the farmer contractor area. Well, this is a very, very long shopping list, as you can understand, but we are very proud to say that EIMA is an event that tells everything about itself, that explicitly presents its organizational criteria and stages of progress, communicates its technical data in real time, and talks about innovative technologies and new products, and explained through an extremely broad programs of conventions, meetings, and workshops about the use and importance of each type of machine. So, of course, that has an impact for all participants and the whole industry. That shows the political world the answers that an industry of excellence can provide on important topics such as food safety and security, the preservation of natural resources, sustainability, and you know it's a very long list. So, in other words, EIMA is a communicative exhibition, a communication-oriented exhibition with a strong, empathetic element, able to influence the strategic and political decisions made in this sector. We feel very proud of that because we are recognized as leaders in this market. Let's take a look at some of the figures characterizing the knowledge value of EIMA. 600 accredited journalists, 100 foreigners from 40 countries. We have the agri-influencers, the so-called content creators, 31, 20 from Italy and 11 from abroad, from Austria, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, Spain, and Ukraine. The roadshow, 17 press conferences in 13 countries, as I mentioned before, 75 appointments on the general calendar with meetings and in-depth debates on all major topics for the industry. 40 appointments will be streamed and recorded and then made available on the YouTube channel of the exhibition. A dozen events organized by publishing companies, and then EIMA Desk, Digital and Campus. EIMA Desk, 83 daily appointments with conferences proposed by the exhibitors in the focus area and the mega jobs meetings. 400 students enrolled coming from technical and professional institutes, and another 600 students that will be guided by experts from Veda Regione Coma's technical service in an educational projects that will be offered to them. Our experts, in fact, do provide conferences at schools and agricultural institutes. And then EIMA Digital Stage, 60 micro-meetings proposed by 20 exhibiting companies at a digital show to present the new frontiers of agriculture 4.0. And the last but not least, EIMA Campus, 16 lectures on trend-setting agromechanical topics proposed by lecturers from 8 Italian universities. Well, allow me to say that these are record figures. There's a lot of work behind the scenes. We want EIMA to be an increasingly important knowledge incubator. Of course, it's very hard to tell you where to go and what events to attend. There's so much on offer. If I were to briefly mention 3 or 4 of the most important appointments, I should mention the conference on the role of agriculture in the geopolitical scenario. We'll have Dario Fabbri, a geopolitical analyst, at the CIA conference on how can agriculture contribute to contrast climate change, and last but not least, the International Forum of Agri-Influencer. And in fact, we'll be able to look at the new communication strategies to explain agricultural mechanization in a more social-oriented way. The technical innovation competition, let's not forget about it. We had an event at the very center of Bologna, and here again the cutting-edge technologies will be presented that were awarded the prizes. 62 innovations in total were awarded by the international jury, 25 innovations, 37 mentioned, that made for a highly attractive preview event for the press and the companies themselves that were able to present their innovations and their new products. The event was held on October 5th in Bologna at Palazzo Reenzo, and a video clip of this event will be shown at the gala dinner on Saturday in order to give you an overview of the event, which was extremely important for us. Let me briefly talk about the institutional presence during the exhibition. I'm going to speak of my behalf. In fact, with the new government, we haven't been able to invite Italian politicians at EIMA because it's been such a recent change in the government. But what I can tell you, quite importantly, tomorrow the open ceremony will have a message from Minister Adolfo Ursu about made in Italy products, and Italian companies unfortunately will be unable to attend the meeting, but asked all of us to read his message on our industry. Minister Lollobrigida will be with us on Friday morning at 11 o'clock. Minister Lollobrigida will be at EIMA. I cannot tell you more about it. I was informed 15 minutes ago. I will have to make all the necessary arrangements with his private secretary. This is a first good sign. In fact, they accepted our request and understood that the Minister of Agriculture must be present at EIMA. It's a good morning. It's a good start for us. Of course, we'll have many more people tomorrow taking part in the opening ceremony. We'll have the General Director of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Minister Angeloin, Italian Trade Agency President, University Rector Gianni Morari, some local politicians, some councillors for agriculture of different Italian regions. And we received from the secretaries of two governments of Italian regions, we've been informed that they are planning to attend. This was a request on their part that made us very proud, and a group of Italian and European members of parliament from Germany, Spain and Romania. For the first time ever, we'll have other member states attending the event, other representatives, and the president of the Agricultural Committee, led by Mr. Paolo De Castro, a long-standing friend of EIMA. And this important day will be held together on November 11th in the afternoon. Many institutional representatives, international institutional representatives. Let me briefly give you some examples. We have some important attendance that will be available to discuss about future projects. Ivory Coast, Jordan, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Libya, Ukraine, Uganda, Vietnam, and Japan, Brazil, Spain, Argentina, Korea and France, US, United States, and Greece. So we are the navel of the world. We're at the very center of the world. So I wonder what other trade fair can actually be so proud as to have so many international guests and institutional representatives. So this is the result of a general commitment. It is an exhibition in which the companies, the exhibitors are extremely dynamic, receiving all possible support to be able to act proactively. Of course, we make our knowledge and experience available to everyone, but exhibiting companies are always involved and called upon to be very proactive. Manufacturers, machine manufacturers do contribute to the success of the event and act as multipliers of interest within EIMA. It is a combination of interest, a real partnership. The tools that the Federation makes available to the exhibiting companies are very many and diversified, so that companies are able to express their own marketing strategies in the best possible way, so they can express their promotional communication skills to the full and be the absolute protagonists of the great event. The brand I Love EIMA has been very successful. We know it's easy and very much used, but it's the result of our awareness of this common value. And this is something that we want to share, as is the result of our experience. We know how important it is and must be upheld and further promoted. Our trade fair can be defined as a high-intensity event, as it concentrates in one place in a few days all the best of agricultural mechanization. And as the slogan of this edition states, is a global experience. For an operator, coming to EIMA means experiencing the entire world offer of agricultural machinery. It means seeing delegations from every continent at work and having direct knowledge of the trends throughout the sector. Finally, it means for manufacturers to be able to have an exchange with specific interlocutors or possible targets in a single context. In this respect, the intensity of the EIMA experience is a requirement for rationality and economic efficiency. In other words, attendance of the exhibition represents a profitable investments for exhibitors and visitors, and this is a decisive aspect. Attending the exhibition, the prestige of the exhibition are strongly motivating elements, but it's not enough if players in the agri-mechanical supply chain don't find a system at the exhibition that is able to optimize the business activities. And then the flow of this global experience that is expanding and reaching into the hearts of the region. So we invested on events and evening appointments that involve all stakeholders, because EIMA wants to reach the hearts of the territory with its history and traditions. So we'll have the international dinners with an evening devoted to all official business operators that will be held at FICO Agri-Food Park. We'll have a gala dinner, a true evening event formula dedicated to our exhibitors in the heart of the city at Palazzo Renzo, and unusual appointments aimed at linking our world to the green and sustainable world of other made in Italy excellencies such as fashion and design, with a dedicated space and in Galleria Cavour in the very heart of Bologna city centre. We've been able to do so thanks to many local partners with whom we have developed a very comprehensive hospitality system. And we do believe that it's extremely important, and we work together to keep the exhibition standard very high. As our TV spot of this EIMA 2022 clearly explain, agriculture, the environment, technology have no boundaries. EIMA is our land, it is our world, and we do wish you all a wonderful global experience. Thank you very much for your attention.
L'agricoltura, l'ambiente, la tecnologia non hanno confini. EIMA, la nostra terra, il nostro mondo. Esposizione internazionale delle macchine, attrezzatura e componentistica per l'agricoltura e la cura del verde. A Bologna, dal 9 al 13 novembre. EIMA, esperienza globale.
Presidenza Calzolari.
President of Bologna Fiere Calzolari. Good evening, everybody. Alessandro and Simona, congratulations, really an enormous flood of figures, content, appointment, events that all help to make this fair a unique, must-go-to opportunity for anybody that is involved in agriculture, mechanization, food, and culture as well. Because, of course, behind all this, there is an enormous know-how, respect for the environment, for the landscape, for our region. And we're very proud indeed to have this friendship that has bound us together for decades with this fair, which is the flower in our buttonhole as well. With Federuna Coma, we have replanned the whole grounds and neighborhood. And just as they are, in fact, developing to meet the requirements of the planet, we too have to be able to offer the best possible hospitality, the best possible facilities within our grounds, which you will see in these coming days, because it's very tiring to come to a fair, to go to all the events and all the appointments and meetings. The figures that you have given are really very encouraging. We have lived through difficult moments of COVID, and we all had the expectation of having a considerable recovery, and we, if you like, tried to hedge our bets. But nonetheless, even if we did hedge our bets, then comeback numbers have been really fantastic. What's happening at the moment has rather cooled things down, because otherwise, had this not taken place, things would have gone much, much better. But all the fairs that we have in Bologna and other venues of an international level especially are also doing very well, even if there are difficulties that some countries have to connect up with the rest of the world. But this is an important signal. It says that in the meanwhile, companies have not, in fact, stood still over these years. They have continued to develop their projects and to perfect and develop their projects. And then everything that Simona talked about, of course, can't be done just in a video conference. We have to meet each other. We have to sit down and talk in person. We have to have meetings. We have to exchange views on what's happening in the world, what's happening in our factory, and so on, even the factories beyond our small circle. It helps us to get to know what's going on. So trade fairs are very important for districts, for sectors, and this sector here, as you know, for our region is very important. But it calls operators from all other countries of the world. And it's also a very important event for the city of Bologna. And as is happening for the most important fairs, there are events outside the trade show district, and it becomes a very important time for linking with the outer city. And Bologna has been able to do this and learned how to do this, because here we have a network proper which gives the best of itself. So tomorrow we open up, and therefore I'd like to wish everybody an excellent EIMA. Thank you. Thank you very much, Giampiero. Now, thank you, Giampiero. Thank you for the hospitality and everything you've done for EIMA and Federuna Coma. So we are now open for questions. Don't be shy, but I know you're not. Who's going to start?
Vai. Il microfono. Parla forte, poi magari per chi non sente ti... Arriva.
No, if they don't have a mic, unfortunately, we can't hear. A very quick question for Simona, but also for Alessandro. Simona, I understand that it's very difficult to foresee how many people will come, visitors, but what are your expectations? What sort of figure could be a satisfactory number of visitors? Alessandro, can you give us some more details as to how component sector is going? This is something which you are concerned with personally with your company. You've given some figures on components. Can you tell us a bit more? Okay, I'll take the first question. That's a very difficult question to answer because it's difficult to make forecasts going above our historic data, which is the edition of 2018. And therefore, at this particular time, I wouldn't like to say that we hope to exceed these figures, even if we hope this, of course, but I certainly won't say this in a press conference. 270,000 of the last year. I would like to say come in at about 300,000. Were we to have 320,000 in 5 days, we'd be more than satisfied. Let's put it that way. With regard to components, that's a sector I know fairly well, and we had a recent meeting and we carried out a survey as Federunicoma. Components are going particularly well, with positive figures both compared to last year and over the expectations for the figures of this year. The reason is fairly simple. To develop a tractor, you have to have thousands of components to make a tractor, and to have components you need fewer, and therefore you have things like transmission components which are a bit more in crisis, but we have on average a 10-20% rise in components. As Federunicoma, we have estimates which are a bit lower in terms of quantity because the price aspect is very important. Agricultural components and also earth-moving components, for example, hoisters, lifters, and earth-moving machines, for example, are all machines and components which are doing well now. With regard to the macro trend for the medium long term, as I said before, with the change of diets, we see, in fact, that there is this increase in components. Italy, in fact, is high up on the list for components. And this is not because I'm a component maker, but we are top in the world as Italian manufacturers go. And this is not just because I'm from this sector. I too have a quick question for Simona and one for Alessandro. Simona tells us that the fair is increasingly international, and the tours that are conducted show this international quality of EIMA. I'd like to know, in this particular moment that we're going through, what are the markets which are most interesting for you, for machine builders and EIMA collaborations. And Alessandro, I think you have an increasing collaboration with Professor Fabbri. Have you carried out a survey with regard to the mid-term prospects? You can't talk about long-term yet, but mid-term prospects with regard to production of machines. Have you done that sort of survey? Now, the international interest in our trade show is very varied because, fortunately, it has involved many parts of the world. Were I to give a priority vis-a-vis the interest this year, it's the African continent. We have many delegates from the African continent, and they're very, very interested in our mechanization. There is slightly less interest, not in terms of quality, though, but in terms of numbers, is seen in Europe. Not in terms of visitors, but in terms of official presence. Also because EIMA is very easy to get to in Europe, from Europe. So this is the scenario. We have lots and lots of Africa. with regard to the midterm analysis in terms of the countries and the development of our sector, we've always said, and Dario has given us some great conferences on Russia, and he's going to talk tomorrow, and I invite everybody to participate, by the way. We are regionalizing. Globalization, in fact, is waning. We are regionalizing, and especially we have to reason in terms of agricultural production. This is being seen. In terms of agricultural machinery, we have to reckon that agriculture will become increasingly local. There'll be an increasing thrust also to fruit and veg production. It gives a higher value added, and then there's the question of the cold chain as well. But instead of cereals or potatoes or whatever, fruit and veg have many more characteristics. And this is an advantage for us because we are purveyors of technology, and therefore we will serve many more countries with a very much more parcelized and a specific sort of agricultural mechanization. We've got to be good, and therefore we have to push our companies and take them by hand and accompany them. And I can assure you that Simona, Fabio, and everybody else, despite the pandemic, have traveled a lot to actually do this, accompany our companies. When I started doing this job as president of Federunacoma, I said that I was a man with a suitcase, and I think in a couple of months' time my suitcase will be even heavier. But I'm going to continue to travel because our work as entrepreneurs to go out and find customers, and we in fact will see greater clients, a larger number of clients, because in fact investments in the various countries is going ahead. African countries, South American countries, many Asian countries as well. Europe is at a good level. We've still got to grow more. But because of the change in diets, there'll be an approach which will be underlined more in fruit and veg. And as I say, this is a competitive advantage for us compared to our German and American colleagues who are fantastic. They have great potential great machines, but they are more specialized in open field production.
That there's a lot of delegates from Africa. There has been a concern in Africa that maybe your machines are a bit expensive compared to others, although they say that the quality is good. The quality is very good. Do you have a plan maybe in your pricing mechanisms to see how that can increase the uptake of the machines in Africa specifically?
I can answer you in English or in Italian. I think it's better for me to answer you in Italian, so the translator can translate for you in English, and for the other they can understand my Italian. Okay? Risponderò in italiano.
So I'm going to answer in Italian, and the interpreter will interpret. Now, Italian machines are generally costly for as your colleague said, for the market in Africa. And what do we intend to do about this? European machines certainly are fairly expensive for the African market, true. But I bear in mind also, I've traveled a lot in Africa, especially recently, and I thank Federunacoma for this. And one thing I was really struck by was talking with various farms who said, "Dear Alessandro," I'm called Alessandro, for me, an investor in a seeder and a tractor is an investment for life. I've tried to invest in an economic regime of a particular country. I've never mentioned the country, but it broke after a couple of years and I had to throw it away. So I threw away the investment of a lifetime. The quality that we express in our machines is a very high quality, even if it's a bit expensive. we're going to try and move in the various questions, developing forms of financing, because agriculture has to be financed. I mean, there's very heavy investments that have to be made, but we're going to try and do this sort of investment which lasts over time. We have an enormous fleet of very old machines in Italy. They're 30 years old, which means, of course, that the machine is very, very good. And Africa needs a sort of mechanization, simple mechanization, especially because Africa has to see grow the possibility of using these machines for a long time, repairing them and going on. But it's becoming precision agriculture as well, because in the African continent, the input in terms of fertilizer, seeds, in terms of chemical products, cost, in relative terms, cost much more than they do in Europe. So Africa needs machines that are fairly intelligent to help you save. So never skimp on quality. Never skimp on quality. In the medium, long term, quality pays. And there's a rule in our sector, which is a long-term investment, is that, in fact, it's not the value of the amount that you pay for it, but it's the value at which you sell that machine, which shows the quality of the machine. A quality machine, if you sell it on, in fact, still is worth a lot of money. The biggest world constructor of agricultural machines is the most expensive builder of agricultural machines. So that's my answer. Any other questions?
Well, if there are no more... No, there's one over there.
Martin Riggets from Farmers Weekly in the UK. Yeah. Could you give us an update on any discussions with the organizers of SEMA?
Good question. Okay, I will answer you in Italian for the other, and the translator will translate for you. Bellissima domanda.
Wonderful question. If we have any contacts with the SEMA organizer, I don't like to badmouth other people and to criticize anybody else. We haven't recently had any contacts with the SEMA organizers. I was really sorry to hear that they decided to change the date, and that there was an overlapping of dates with EIMA. Just a week of 10 days of difference would have meant a lot to us and to some of our exhibitors. So we would have avoided problems, less costs and everything. Information I received from Paris is that they have more of a domestic trade fair. And I'm sorry to say that because I attended the SEMA trade fair for many years, so it's much smaller than I remember it to be. The SEMA, in my opinion, has missed a major opportunity, but didn't lose it to EIMA, but to another competitor, if you like, the Hanover Trade Fair, meant for large mechanization, larger surfaces, open field. EIMA is mainly addressed to specialized farming, two completely different target market. Federico Nacoma, been here for a few years now, and I can say we decided to go for specialization, innovation, specialized crops, specialized machinery, components, irrigation, and focusing on a specialized market. We have an advantage in Italy. We are one of the 3 leading countries in the world in terms of manufacturing of agricultural machinery. The Germans are also leaders, and France, fortunately, over the last few years, has lost much of its mechanical industry, especially in the area of agricultural machinery. I do hope that in the years to come, CIMA decides not to overlap with EIMA and not to create any problems to exhibitors. I'm convinced it's going to be a very good local trade fair, but of course it will never match the quality of Agritechnica in Hanover and a specialized trade fair such as EIMA. There's a kind of polarized world. So go ahead with your question. One question each. As regards EIMA, my impression is that the number of exhibitors this year, talking about Italian exhibitors, are more or less the same number as the previous edition, but we have more international exhibitors. Do you have any leading country in terms of number of exhibitors here at EIMA? And to Alessandro, that question was for Simona. I know less orders are coming in this year, but what about delivery times? Is the situation getting better? You go first. Thank you. We have more international exhibitors. We have collective groups. We have the Turkish group, which is quite important. I can't remember all of them out of the top of my head. My apologies. But another important group is the one from Argentina. We have several companies. Turkey has a very large group of exhibitors here at EIMA. Well, delivery times have not improved, unfortunately. There are still some delays. Raw materials are coming in. Luckily, we have problems with transmissions, engines, and electronics. Main problems for transmissions and engines are mainly in the electronics area. I'm a user and a buyer and a manufacturer of electronic cards, but unfortunately, I've recently been informed that delivery times of microprocessors and semiconductors in general have increased. Of course, we've overcome a very difficult time where prices were going up non-stop, but some products are not available. There are 2 driving industries in our sector, which is not the automotive, but rather the smartphones and consumer electronics. And then the toy industry. So the second largest consumer of electronics in the world is the toys industry. I know that a toy is very cheap and a tractor is very expensive, but probably they've been able to strike better contracts. But we're in trouble. We still have very long delivery times, especially for large, complex machines over 12 months. For self-propelled machines from 4 to 6 months, simpler machines with less components, and so less breakdowns in the supply chain, a few months. The order portfolios, which had kind of declined in between June, July, and August, starting September, have improved considerably. And so that's the time lag. big, but that's not due to the fact that Italy doesn't want to do better. I think Italy has given a wonderful example to Europe. We're not flexible. We're not rigid. We're very flexible. We're not very dependent on so many different things. We are inventing whatever possible solution in electronics. We are changing processors in electronic cards in order to boost the production, but we're still in trouble. Final question. For two reasons. So Gianni doesn't feel like he has to ask one, and Alessandro gave me a right ball. We have a new government, a new minister. So what's the outlook? What are your expectations about the new government? Is the new government going to do something about issuing the decree? Well, I got positive news from the new minister. We haven't met yet. We only talked over the phone, and some colleagues reported that to me. Is apparently very capable. He doesn't have previous experience in agriculture, but is very keen to get started. I'm really looking forward to tell him about AIM. I'm going to tell him everything about our world. I hope I can motivate and engage him. There are two very important areas that we've been working on with the ministry for a while. The most important issue is the national recovery plan. So we have about 400 million euros tractors, self-propelled, and so we have to get something out of the recovery plan. And then the new common agricultural policy. We've taken part in many roundtables about that, and we're working on it. And as I tried to explain to you before, let's stop tipping around. It doesn't make any sense. We need to ask farmers to make long-term investments. We need to correct some issues that have emerged over the last few years. Too much money spent on the wrong things. We made proposals. We've been in contact with different people at the ministry, and let's hope the new minister can do something about it. With the fall of the previous cabinet, everything got somehow blocked. So I think the final recovery plan will be approved at a later stage. So the Ministry of Economy, the different ministries will have to discuss our plan. We signed the request. We want at least 6 months period to go through all delayed deliveries. It is a very complex and fascinating world that we represent. We have somebody here at the first row.
I come from.
Io vengo dal Giappone.
You have any strategy for the agriculture machinery robot? You know, the machinery is becoming bigger and bigger to increase labor productivity. But in the case of the robot, we don't need to make the machine bigger. And do you Unacoma has some new strategy to accelerate the robotics for agricultural machinery? This is my question.
Okay, I will answer to you in Italian and the translator will translate for you. Allora, la domanda sulla robotica, qual è il nostro approccio?
Well, what about robotics? So we have a federation. We're not a company. We're not a business. So I can tell you what our approach is as a federation. This year at EIMA Digital, we have a section devoted to robotics. It used to be there in the previous edition, but it's now much larger, and we're very proud of it. In my opinion, robotics doesn't need large machines. Robotics is much more suitable for specialized crops, because in extensive farming, manpower is extremely limited. If you buy a combined harvester that costs 600,000, 700,000 euro, but the operator cost, the cost of machine, depreciation is practically nothing. So we can even put a robot on the machine, but we're not going to save a lot of money. But if you place a robot just harvesting zucchini or any vegetable instead of 20 people, we'll have a much better yield. So robotics is about small machinery. The automation logic will change completely. It will no longer aimed at optimizing, focused on maximum yield per hectare, but it will be robotics and electronics which will be product-driven. We'll have electronics and robotics for that apple, for that zucchini, for that tomato, for that very cherry or whatever produce. So the approach is completely different. In many industrialized countries, such as Japan and Italy too, we have a major labor shortage, and in the future we'll have to increasingly resort to robotics. Another sector where robotics can be quite successful is the mechanical weeding processes and sowing, especially when it comes to small machines. The large seeding machines are unbeatable, but when talking about mechanical selective weeding, a robot can really make a difference in terms of environmental impact. Any more questions? Well, if there are no more questions. Yes. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us. There's a cocktail waiting for you outside. The international press, please wait here. We can meet and take your questions in English and have an exchange, get together. Thank you so much.